I was talking about the word comeuppance earlier, and there's also another one called, I think it's Schadenfreude or something. It's a German word which means taking pleasure in somebody else's anguish, which isn't really a good thing, but often when it happens to liberals and something goes doesn't work well for them, I'll put it that way. It's difficult not to walk around with it. Was when I woke up the Wednesday morning after election day, I couldn't wipe the smile off my face. And I'm sure that a great many people in this listening audience felt the same way. 9:43. And when I saw all of those snowflakes crying because Clinton lost, I even smiled more broadly. Not because I'm happy they're in pain. I just hope it someday leads them to enlightenment. We're at 39. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. Telephone number for reaching our show today, 736 0300. 736 0300. I bring this up because if you didn't know, ESPN laid off 100 people yesterday, on air people, which means there'll be further cuts coming behind the scenes. I've had a number of friends over the years who ended up getting jobs there. My buddy Tony Melfi, I worked with him in television. He was a photographer at ESPN for many, many years. He may still be there. I haven't had a chance to talk to him in the last few years. Mike Tirico and I were formerly co-workers together at a television station way back when, back in the olden days, put it that way. And so I know a little bit how the place operates internally from things friends told me over the years after they got jobs there. ESPN is not your typical. When I used to walk into the sports office at various TV stations I worked at, it was like hanging out in the diner or the corner bar. People, the people who run some of these big companies, there's the joke that they have to be liked at all of the Manhattan cocktail parties. So they make their decisions based upon that. To give you a little background, when I first moved away from my hometown permanently, I moved away briefly, went back for 6 months, and then after 6 months was gone permanently, and I guess it's been over 30 years now. But I lived for a couple of years in a town when I was first getting my radio career off the ground. I know that sounds highfalutin. His radio career. My job. But I was living in this town, and a few blocks from my house, there was a very popular restaurant, but they'd converted part of it into what was called a sports bar. These were still relatively new, a new idea, this sports bar motif. But you'd walk into this place. To the left, there was a bar and a small room that the bar sat in. But if you went to the right, there was a big, wide open room with a popcorn machine and 8 television sets and lots of tables. So you didn't even have to be a heavy drinker or anything to go in there and sit down. It was just a place for people to gather to watch ball games. And with 8 TV sets, you could have multiple games on at the same time. What I know of sports fans is generally this: they're not people who are walking around with identity issues. They're not guys who are walking around saying, some sports athletes might have that. We heard from one on Tucker Carlson's show on Monday night. But you average this place, it was called Curly's. Curly's would attract the young men and sometimes young women from all over town. There was a prison a couple of blocks away. A lot of the prison guards would hang out in there, a lot of police officers, firefighters, a lot of media people like me, and just local business owners. But they'd come into, I remember I watched the historic fight where Buster Douglas beat Mike Tyson that night. I was there with friends from work. We went there to watch it together. And these guys are not shrinking violets who go watch these sporting events. We'd go there and we'd watch Olympics. We'd watch football, especially football, watch a lot of baseball out of the place. My boss used to think I spent too much time there. And I said, look, I don't have the money to drink a lot. I just go there because at the time, with what little he paid me, at the time I had a tiny little black and white TV screen and I couldn't bring in much in the way of football or baseball and the like. But I'm telling you right now, the people who were in there watching sports every night, and a lot of it was ESPN at the time, they weren't flaming liberals. I don't think a lot of flaming liberals are huge sports fans. Maybe in San Francisco they go watch the Giants play because they want to be seen at the ballpark, but they don't necessarily go because they're huge sports fans. And yet ESPN is catering to a crowd that is, how shall we put it, effete, but not necessarily sports fans. There was a time just a decade ago when ESPN was seen as a behemoth. And I remember when the National Hockey League left ESPN and signed a contract with what was then Outdoor Venture, whatever they called it, network. It later became NBC Sports. And the critics all said, well, this is going to hurt their game because if you're not on ESPN, you're not on the sports radar. And what's happened is a sport that wasn't terribly popular in the United States anyway has become more popular over at NBC Sports because it becomes the dominant cornerstone of their programming. And ESPN, meanwhile, I'll make a couple of analogies here. I remember when I was a young reporter, I went and had to cover a case in a federal court. And on my lunch break, I walked across the street and I ate at a Woolworth's lunch counter. And it was adjacent to where the original Woolworth store had been, or I think the second store Woolworth may have opened. There was a time in retail in the late 1800s and through a good part of the early 1900s when Woolworth was seen as the store that was going to put everybody else out of business. You can't find a Woolworths today. There was a time when Sears was thought to be that store that was going to push everybody else out of business. It was the behemoth, the big kid on the block, and Sears may not survive until the end of this year. There was a time when it was thought Walmart was just going to eat everybody else's lunch when it came to retailing, and then Walmart branched into groceries, and it's like, oh no. 20 years ago, we were sitting around in newsrooms, and I remember we would judge sometimes for other cities. We would judge their entries for award ceremonies. And there was always somebody who would do a 5-part series on when Walmart comes to town and how it devastates Main Street and how it rips the guts out of the traditional local merchants. But look where Walmart is now. Along came Amazon, and Walmart is sucking wind. Walmart's closing stores and scaling back and trying to get into the online operation instead. So each and every time you hear this, that somebody else is going to put everybody else out of business, something called creative destruction comes along and changes the game. That's how capitalism works. That's why we don't have just one great big company controlling everything. Somebody else gets a better idea, comes along, and they take down the giant. There was a time when it was thought ESPN was such a juggernaut that they launched ESPN University, ESPN 1, 2, and 3, and I guess there's ESPN for left-handed people and ESPN for pituitary giants. You've got all of these things out there that are ESPN labeled, and the belief was ESPN would dominate the industry from now on. This is a writer named T. Beckett Adams, writing at Washington Examiner. ESPN's high-profile layoffs this week come just days after its public editor assured readers the company had no intention of backing away from political commentary. Now, when I went to see Buster Douglas fight Mike Tyson that night, that's almost 30 years ago, we went to watch a boxing match. We didn't go to hear anybody pontificate about Republicans and conservatives being mean-spirited. And the writer at ESPN, the public editor, said, ESPN has made it clear it's not sticking to sports. In other words, they're going to continue to branch out into politics. These are the same people who fired Curt Schilling because his politics didn't match the politics of the corporate board. You may recall Schilling, who's a conservative and is planning on challenging for U.S. Senate in Massachusetts, and a hero of the Boston Red Sox and Red Sox Nation. As a Christian conservative, he posted a photograph, a cartoon on his Facebook page, of a grubby man who wanted to use a girl's room, a girl's lavatory. He got fired. But yet ESPN turned around and gave a Courage Award to Bruce Lynn Jenner. How do you think sports fans, I look at Jenner and I just go, ew. When I hear that voice, and I go, ew. It curdles my blood. Now, how do you think this appeals to the average beer-guzzling, truck-driving sports fan out there? It doesn't. The most recent round of layoffs comes after months of sharp declines in subscriptions at ESPN, according to the writer. It also comes amid criticism that the network has become too political in recent years. ESPN, which was thought to be undefeated and unbeatable, has experienced a loss of roughly 10 million subscribers in the last 5 years, according to Nielsen Media Research. At this pace, if the hemorrhaging continues, there simply won't be an ESPN in a few years. I feel awful about the people who are losing their jobs there. But many of them played right along and got on board. Liberalism is the ultimate truth and the self-evident truth, and if you don't believe it, then therefore we don't want your business. We don't want you watching our station. And that was the marketing folks obviously didn't have much of a voice in some of the decisions. 9:53, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're at 41, and you're on the air.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the father and son who started ESPN currently have a polling company that's very prominent. Do you remember who that is? They're on Fox a lot, and not so much lately. Of course, towards the elections they are. Do you remember who that is?
I don't recall the name, but I know who you mean.
Yeah, exactly. He's a very prominent pollster, and he's obviously a conservative, and it was started out differently than it's turned out to be. It's speaking of ESPN and their viewers. So many people that are viewers of ESPN are voters for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And they were talking the other day about Bruce Springsteen and how he's so against Trump. And he says, but his concerts are filled with people that voted for Trump. And these people don't, they're not that stupid, but they're so their idealism or their adherence to the end game or going along with what they're expected to do is so important to them. You say to yourself, do you ever have an original thought of your own, or are you just going along because that's what's expected of you? I'll hang up. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you. And I look at this, and I have spent, ever since the Schilling firing, I don't think I've turned on ESPN twice because I wanted to watch a particular ball game. I gritted my teeth, and I have a friend, she calls some football games for ESPN, Beth Mowens, and I would watch if she was calling the game, but otherwise I watch Fox Sports now for NASCAR, and I've been watching NBC Sports. Another caller with us. You're on the air on KLIX.
Bill, tonight the ESPN will have the National Football League draft. The football teams thoroughly examine not just the physical abilities of the players, but their mental makeup. Each player will be checked out more thoroughly than Obama was when he was Barry Soetoro.
Well said. And, that's the other thing. Why do I want to sit around and watch a bunch of guys getting drafted? Sports is about the game, not about a bunch of people sitting in an arena while somebody calls out names. You're up next. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.
Hey, Bill, excellent show as always.
Thank you.
I used to be an ardent viewer of ESPN, and I tell you what, it just about made me sick. I got tired of listening to their political crap, and instead of just playing sports. I watched ESPN for the sports, not for their political point of views. And and you might call me a Neanderthal and out of touch with society and the way we're thinking, but Bruce Jenner is just a freak. Any man that wants to dress up and do, I don't know, they need therapy or something, but keep it off the sports, and God bless you and keep up the good work.
I thank you. It's like a few years ago when Michael Sams was getting all of these awards for his courage that he came out as being a homosexual. He wasn't a very good football player, not at an NFL level, but the Rams, who were still based in St. Louis, drafted him from the University of Missouri because they were pressured. Let's not kid anybody about this. Well, we want to show that we are open-minded in the NFL and that the St. Louis Rams are an open-minded franchise. The guy, they wasted a draft pick. They needed that pick with that franchise. Trust me, they wasted the pick for this. And then Sams gets all these awards. On the other hand, a guy who goes to church and does mission work and has traveled the world doing mission work and treats children as if, with some respect and we're talking about a guy who's not playing baseball, but he played football for a while at Florida and then briefly in the NFL, Tim Tebow. He's reviled by these people in media. Why? What has he done wrong? He doesn't drink and he doesn't smoke and he doesn't swear and doesn't run anybody down. He's the bad guy, according to all of these folks. They mock him and make fun of him. Give me a break. we've got to take a break ourselves. We'll have to resume this tomorrow, God willing, if the creek don't rise. They'll allow me to come back and do this all over again between 8 and 10 o'clock in the morning. Oh, tomorrow being Friday, we're going to be joined by Tommy Alquist. He's running for governor in Idaho. He's one of, I believe, 4 announced Republicans. He is going to be among 2 of the candidates who are appearing in Jerome County at the breakfast, the Lincoln Day breakfast, on Saturday morning at the Mountain View Barn just outside of Jerome. And Alquist is going to join us between 8:30 and 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And also we're talking firearms tomorrow with Todd Eccles between 9 and 10 o'clock. So it should be quite an interesting show. In the meantime, Rush Limbaugh will follow the news coming up in just a few minutes from Fox. And we'll have Sean Hannity following the news at 1 o'clock today. Glenn Beck's program following 4 o'clock news. And then tonight, Dave Ramsey from 7 to 10 right here on News Radio 1310, KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com.